start by thanking Naila Mahmood for inviting me here and for organizing this whole thing. Thank you so much, Naila. I'm really grateful to present my work in Pakistan. I was telling several people in the audience that I haven't really shown my work or talked about my work very much in Pakistan, so this is a really meaningful opportunity for me. Can you all hear me okay in the back there as well? Great. In this presentation, I'm focusing on work that I've made in the last 5 years. So I'm showing pretty recent things. And before I begin talking about the work directly, I think I'd like to frame my practice a little bit, give a little bit of a framework for the kind of work that I make. My practice is multidisciplinary and it's research-based. For me, questions about the world of personal or public relevance become a prompt for an open-ended, transdisciplinary, immersive investigation. Some of you may ask what research looks like in art practice. It looks slightly different from other fields. In academia or a scientist, they're often trying to test a theory when they're doing research. But I think in contrast, as an artist, I feel like I have the opportunity and the liberty to make work that is promiscuously nonlinear. Some of the activities that I do in my research-based practice involve making drawings, doing more sort of traditional scholarly research, visiting archives, but it also involves engaging with places and taking walks, conducting interviews, making videos, doing performance work, and becoming a participant observer in spaces that sometimes make me uncomfortable. I make work between the US, India, Pakistan, Europe, and the Middle East, and China more recently. And my focus is to make work that is relevant and legible in various cultural contexts. I'm going to move to the next slide. So the first work I'm going to talk about is actually, it was first shown here in this space in a kind of informal way. And I'll explain that in just one second. But the work is called Cranes and Cube, and it's from 2017. Cranes and Cube is a virtual reality reconstruction of the city of Mecca from a poetic but an ambivalent point of view. It talks about the relationship between religion, consumerism, as well as the material and cultural history of the city of Mecca. The inspiration for this work came in 2015. I was looking at some journalistic images, not these. These are actually, the next two images are by a Saudi artist, Ahmed Mater. But I was looking at some photographs of these construction cranes that had fallen. I'm sure many of you saw those. This is an event that's happened more than once in Mecca, but in 2015 there were 111 Muslim pilgrims that were killed, and I was just looking at the clutter of cranes that were shown in that image, which to me represented a kind of frenzied, unfettered development. And it also reminded me of other cities that I've grown up in, including, or lived in, including San Francisco and even here in Karachi. So this is Ahmed Mater's image. And so I started doing a series of drawings, actually. Sorry, I moved through that quickly. Yeah, so this is, so I made a few drawings which, captured the visual aesthetic of construction sites and narrates the city from, again, an ambivalent subjectivity. These drawings are propositional, they're critical, and they speak about the force fields of idealism and grandeur of the real estate boom in the Middle East. So this drawing was shown here at T2F, I think maybe three years ago, was it? So while I was working on the drawings, I realized that I wanted to make a virtual reality version of Mecca. And in my version of Mecca, when you enter the VR space, you encounter the Kaaba. And you are surrounded by a forest of construction cranes. And you also encounter these strange, surrealist sculptural objects that are made from fragments of actual architectural elements that I photographed in Mecca, in Jeddah, and in Madain Saleh, which is a pre-Islamic archaeological site about, I think, 6 hours from Jeddah. So here's another. I'll play a short clip of this video in just 1 second, so you have a sense of what the work looks like. That's a detail from Madain Saleh, and the way you experience the virtual reality is as you wait for the headset. Which is not very COVID friendly now, so I don't know how I'm going to work in VR again. But there's text on the wall that you encounter, which talks about my familial histories around the Hajj. It talks about the experience of migrant laborers in the city of Mecca, and it talks about sort of these cycles of growth and decay that the city has experienced. I want to talk a little bit about my use of VR. So, as you can imagine, these works are completely immersive, and I'm interested in creating VR spaces that, that are set apart from the industry model of VR that we experience in games and such things. I'm interested in creating a liminal space, which is a space in between, the real and the virtual realm. And in my VR pieces, you experience a lot of glitches. You encounter visual detritus. And I'm interested in those kinds of things because I feel that they help the viewer sort of critically reflect on what it is that they're seeing. Here's another detail from how you experience the piece. And I'm going to end the slideshow, and I'm going to quickly just show maybe a 1-minute clip of the VR piece in video. So just. Okay, so so you saw a video version of the piece, but when you are in the VR space, the scale of these objects is similar to how you would encounter them in the world, yeah, and I'm interested in the VR provides me the opportunity to assimilate the viewer in my version of Mecca, which is what I'm interested in doing for this piece. I'm going to move on to the next work, which is called Indian Mangoes by the Red Sea. And this work was created while I was doing research for Cranes and Cube. I was able to go to Saudi Arabia a couple of times with the help of some grants, and so in this work you see me with a couple of my grad students, and we're eating Indian mangoes, which we found by talking to taxi drivers in Jeddah who would take us to markets where this itinerant mango was available. And the video is shot in 3 different locations along the Red Sea, at the port where pilgrims used to arrive. And so the area where you see me is a neighborhood that was first established in Jeddah in the 7th century. And my students, again, are located in, one of them in the middle, in front of this sort of newer Orientalist fountain, and then Olivia at the end is by the shore there. And so in this work we eat the Indian mango in Saudi Arabia, and the video offers moments of devotional interaction between different bodies, the human and the fruit. And the work asks questions about trade routes, memorialization of demolished structures, and the visual aesthetics of growth and decay in urban environments. So the next piece, I'm sort of jumping through time here because I think the works are linked. So the next piece was just finished at the end of last year, and it's called Fruit from Elsewhere. And the earlier piece, Indian Mango by the Red Sea, was what instigated this work. This piece is about my love affair and my desire with for the Indian mango. And so, this video became sort of a jumping off point to create a large installation about the Indian mango. So here's a shot of what the installation looks like. The global traffic of food, plants, and materials still retains vestiges of relations forged by imperialism. As I started building this project, I began reading about entangled human and mango histories, which led me to the color Indian yellow. As some of you may know, Indian yellow was made with mangoes in Bengal, and it was a vital part of the imperial palette. It was a color that was really desirable by a lot of British painters. And Western color theorists would talk about using the color Indian yellow to keep races separate on the canvas. So Indian yellow was used to depict brown people, and there are all kinds of hearsay and scientific reports about how this color was produced. It was produced by force-feeding mango leaves to cows who would then become really sick and only live to be about a couple of years old. The cow urine was collected and thickened and made into these pigment balls, which were then shipped mostly to England and other parts of Europe. And because of the foul smell of the color, it was actually not utilized very much by Indian and South Asian painters. So I created these spheres out of imitation yellow pigment, because you can't find Indian yellow pigment anymore. And they were set up on these shipping pallets and, assembled in a kind of map-like form, pointing to chains of affinities and circuits of trade. Here's a detail of the spheres that I made. And this next image is actually an image from the Harvard Pigment collection. So here you can see what the pigment balls look like that were transported. So part of the installation were 3 paintings, and the paintings locate entanglements where historical narratives and various representational practices collide and mingle. So here you see a cow that's sick, and you also see a representation of a mango tree, which is borrowed from a Mughal miniature painting. In this work, you see illustrations that are taken from colonial illustrations of the mango tree and parts of the mango plant. And again, another stylized mango tree borrowed from a 16th century Mughal painting, and a sick cow, which was my own fabulation, I guess. In the series of paintings, you also see a self-portrait in the tradition of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, who was called a naturalist and a world Caesar, as you all know. Jahangir was really interested in scientifically recording and measuring and testing his possessions. He collected things from all over the world. And he commissioned a lot of portraits in this way, where he would, place an object that he was proud of or wanted to show off, and he would commission portraits where you would see him ruminating on this object. So I performed Jahangir's gesture in this work to think about my own relationship to the Indian mango. And then another element, the last element of this installation, is poetic text. Like Cranes and Cube, this work also has some text. Text often sort of is part of my installations, and what I think of it as a mode for me to give the viewer an economy of hints, which visually and textually connects different narratives and gives enough to the viewer to carry the work forward. The text appears in this field of. Oh, yeah. Oh, you'd like me to read it? Okay, so this one says, the mango asserted its agency by narrating the empire. And then this one said, the foul-smelling Indian yellow stood in for the colonized subject. Okay, so, so I got a lot of mileage out of my love for the mango, Indian mango. As you'll see, this work is from earlier this year. It's called Urban Forest, and it was installed in China, in Shenzhen, at a large sculpture park. This is a multifaceted new media art project. The aim of the project is to trouble our ideas of urbanism and nature by creating a fictional human-nature encounter in the form of a large-scale metal and augmented reality sculpture. The augmented reality visualizes a contradictory and unusual juxtaposition of construction bamboo scaffolding, which are wrapped around these mango trees, which you might recognize from the earlier paintings. And actually, I have the painting that this comes from. So you see the form of the mango, which I borrowed, or the mango tree, rather. So, I'm appropriating the Indian tree structure in Shenzhen because I'm interested in thinking about relations between distant lands through the global movement of food, materials, and knowledge. By thinking about this tree in China, which China is the second largest exporter of Indian mangoes, which I didn't know until I started thinking about this work and looking into it. Also in Shenzhen, which is southern China, their highways are lined with these mango trees, not the Mangifera indica, which is the Indian mango species, but other ornamental mangoes. So there's the plants in that city really reminded me of being in Karachi. So this is a detail of that the metal sculpture, and the way the piece works is that there are two QR codes that are posted near the sculpture. So when you go up to the work, you can scan the code, and on your cell phone, you see an animation of construction scaffolding sort of growing on top of the sculpture that's in front of you. So the augmented reality, I was thinking of it as a way to remind the viewer of different and conflicting realities that exist simultaneously in an urban environment. This piece is called "Building the City of Exiles" from 2018. And this is also a VR video sculpture and text installation. This was a commission where I was asked to make a work about, a VR work about San Francisco. It made sense to me, especially after the Mecca piece, to think about the status of sanctuary city that the city of San Francisco has. Mecca, as some of you know, is a haram. It's a sanctuary city. So it was meaningful to me to think about the two cities as linked in this sort of concept of urban planning. One which has to do with ideas around Islamic urban planning, and the other about immigrants who come and live in San Francisco. So what you see in the work is, let's see. So I photographed and 3D modeled homeless encampments, which are very common in the city. So the VR sort of functions as a place which immerses you and puts you directly sort of in close proximity to these structures that we train ourselves to ignore and to dismiss. So the piece sort of forces you to think about these things. So I was thinking about, again, the concept of haram, which is a concept where in Mecca, for instance, there you can't cut down trees, or there are areas where you can't slaughter animals. There's a ban on waging war, any kind of bloodshed. So how does the unfettered commercialism that we understand in Mecca, like how does it, how do those ideas coexist? And similarly in San Francisco, the alarming rate at which the city is developing, who gets marginalized in the process? What is the toll on the environment of the city? These were some of the questions that I had in mind. So here's a detail of the installation. I'm just going to look at the time. Am I okay in terms of time, Nyla? Yeah, okay. So, and so also part of this installation were these boxes which were constructed out of images of prayer rugs from Yemeni refugees who have come and settled in San Francisco. I was thinking about the prayer rug as a portable sanctuary that these refugees carried with them to San Francisco from Yemen. So the next work is called After the Minaret from 2019. And this work is an installation of screen prints, photographs, and text. And the work engages the history of preservation and the changes to the form of the Giralda Tower in Sevilla in southern Spain. The Giralda was actually an Ottoman minaret, which was connected to a mosque. And it became a cathedral bell tower as the political power structures in Spain shifted. This piece was made for the University of Sevilla as a commission. I was invited to make some work, and I decided I wanted to make something that was site-specific. I used to teach at the Kansas City Art Institute for a couple of years, and I lived in a few blocks from the structure, which is a replica of the Sevilla minaret, and it's part of an outdoor mall. I was thinking about that structure, and I knew I wanted to make something around that, and I realized as I was looking into this that there are actually many replicas and copies of the minaret in Europe and in the US. For those of you who know San Francisco, the Ferry Building is inspired, or the tower there is inspired by the minaret in Spain, as well as the second Madison Square Garden, the tower there, and numerous other structures. So the artwork that I created is made up of these overlapping and repetitive images of the minaret that trace the history of changes to the Giralda, my drawings. They show various copies, replicas and structures that were influenced by the minaret. So they're made on this really translucent paper. So they're shown as a kind of layered, a series of drawings. In addition, there are photographs of lichen that were taken at the Giralda when I went to install this piece, and these photographs were also part of the exhibit. So I don't know if you all are familiar with lichen, but lichen are they're these sort of plant species They're actually it's not a single entity. It's a mixture of a fungus and an algae, so like a mushroom and algae, which grows sort of underwater. So these two plant bodies, they live in this productive relationship and form lichen. And I was interested in thinking about the lichen on the minaret, because lichen lived to be about 4,000 years old. And so these lichen that are on the minaret, they've seen all the changes to the minaret over the last 800 years. And they've seen all the socio-political changes. And I was interested in the lichen itself. Lichen is, it covers about 6% of the Earth's surface, so it's very common, and it lives in very harsh environments. So if you start paying attention as you walk through the city, you'll see different forms of lichen growing on architecture, rocks, and other kinds of spaces. And I'm interested in the lichen again because it grows really slowly in rock time or in geological time, and it's anti-capitalist, right? So you can't cultivate lichen in a lab, even though it has some medicinal properties. The lichen, they grow, when they want and how they want, and they're resistant to any kind of ideas of growth and development that us humans have. So as I was looking at the information around the Giralda, I was reading all these reports by people who preserved the building, who were sort of debating if the lichen were helping the minaret, or if they were actually slowly sort of eating away at the rock surface. And I was interested in this idea that that the lichen, much like humans, were changing the structure of the minaret by, again, slowly eating away at the stone, but in geological time. So it was happening so slowly that it would not register in our own lifetimes. Hence it made sense for me to make this juxtaposition, and the project, it raises questions about cultural influence, about knowledge transference between people and other species, and the project thinks about history from a non-human perspective. And then I'm quickly going to talk about this piece that I'm currently working on. I spent a good part of yesterday working on this piece around Karachi, and it's called After Jahangir. I think I touched upon it briefly, but it's a photographic series which involves research of Islamic Mughal miniature portraits, which will lead to a series of self-portraits. So what you're seeing here is it's actually work in progress. None of it is finished. The photographs, which I'll show again, they're not even color corrected correctly. I spoke about Jahangir's connoisseurship earlier, so I won't repeat it too much. But Jahangir was interested in projecting power by collecting turkeys and pineapples, from South America and other parts of the world. But in his in the Mughal sort of desire to collect there wasn't this kind of top-down paradigm around, imperialism. For the Mughals, acquisitions were about sort of seeing and ordering the world, but they weren't about a kind of eco-colonial domination. So I'm interested in thinking about this notion in relation to to our own consumption habits. So for this work, what I'll be doing, much like this image, I'm holding up objects to ruminate on their properties in Jahangir's tradition, and I'll also be working with some students at Habib University, where we'll collectively make these portraits, carefully gazing at an object placed on our palms. I've asked the students to, gather things that they consume and bring it to the workshop for us to talk about material goods and our relationship to it. You'll notice these like strange sculptural objects in the portrait, which I was thinking about these forms being placed in the photographic frame as these objects that might engender multiple spatial and temporal orientations. So these images that you see here are taken in San Francisco. And so through this work, I'm interested in depicting entanglements of historical representations and placing myself and some students at Habib University within this system. We'll talk about new possibilities of thinking about matter, about materiality, about the ecology. I believe that the Jahangir's portrait, they represent an ancient form of ecological and spatial awareness. And through this project, I'm interested in finding new ways to think about our relationship to the material world. I think this is the last image I have, and I would love to hear your comments and answer any questions that you may have. Can I turn this on? Yeah, okay.
Madam, so thank you for your presentation. I mean, one question I have in my mind is that the architecture of the Mughals, that they were great in architecture. And after that, British Empire also constructed so many architecture buildings. But after the independence of the subcontinent, the architecture of that glorious architecture we couldn't see that was made by Mughals or the British Empire. What could be the reason for that? I mean, because they were the dictators or the great emperors having a lot of financial resources, that's why they were constructing so huge, glorious architectures. And after that, maybe because of what could be the reason for that?
Are you suggesting that there's a kind of decline in the quality of the architecture, or I'm trying to understand your question.
Yeah, I mean because they were the emperors, Mughals, and after that the British Empire. They wanted to construct the buildings like that as they desire. But right. After that, because of there were no emperors after the independence, so quality was declining or what?
Well, so, I'm not a historian of Islamic architecture, but, I think that the systems of patronage have changed, and I mean, we certainly, there are different ways in which architecture plays out in our environment now. I mean, there are things being built all around us, right? So maybe things go up and down faster. So, I'm not sure if there's been a decline in terms of how much construction that happens. Certainly the technologies have changed, and the time frame in which things are built have drastically shifted. But our need to see glorious structures, I think, still is there, right? I hope that answers your questions.
So one question can I ask? I mean, about the cranes, that you have shown in your installation, the cranes.
The cranes.
And the incidence of cranes in Mecca, because they didn't follow the safety rule, and one of the crane fall down on the pilgrims, and 115 pilgrims died because of that. And the same kind of safety rules are not followed in our shipbreaking industry in Karachi also. In the, that we have shipbreaking industry.
Right.
In Gidani. Also there, safety rules are not followed. So many laborers died in one of the ship. So, I mean, in the Western world, the safety rules are something different that we have in this eastern part of the world. Well,
accidents happen there as well. I mean, maybe the they're slightly more progressive in terms of establishing safety structures in place. But there are plenty of bad things that happen at construction sites, but also in other arenas in other parts of the world, including the U.S. So yeah, builders and engineers, I think the lives of the laborers are they're not as valuable as other lives. So yeah. We have another question.
Hi, Asma.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Thank you for your presentation. So it's actually, it's interesting because here in Karachi now, I feel like so much of your work that you've discussed chronologically has a lot of resonances. There's a huge, in Karachi especially, we see these cycles of huge building booms, as well as a Wahhabization and a Khalijization. I don't say Arabization, we've had this conversation. Khalijization of the country along a very particular line, right? So we want to see, not we, but there is a drive to see what's happening in Saudi and in the Emirates happen here, like with various Dubai-oriented construction firms, and it almost has this religious quality because it comes from there, right? And then also mango season is going to start in about a month, the mangoes are getting bigger and bigger. And then you also have Karachi being on the very edge of the Mughal Empire, so there are these various ways, I think, in which, you're sort of, if I can use the word, parodying with Jahangir's portraits and this sense of discovery, right? Karachi was not in the center of empire, it has, so therefore I feel like in some ways it has a more modest and humble edge to it, where I think experimenting with this idea of what the Mughals even were is more possible. And I think you could probably say that for Sindh as a whole, And I'm wondering, do you feel like your practice is coming back here towards South Asia? Do you feel like you're finding yourself making a certain investment within Karachi or within this landscape with this next project after Jahangir?
Yeah, thank you so much for that thoughtful question. I think so. I mean, I think I was talking to Naila earlier and saying how just talking about the work here is such a different experience because I don't have to. I don't have to explain the context for a lot of my pieces because it just makes sense to the audience. I don't have to, draw sort of elaborate ideas around the historical context of the pieces. And I think, I think I've always, even though the works that I was making earlier maybe didn't engage with the history of Karachi or this part of South Asia directly. I was always thinking in a kind of contrapuntal way where there were in my head there were always these themes that I understood through the context of experiencing and living in various different cities. So it feels good to be making work in Karachi and perhaps about Karachi. But I feel like I've always done that. Maybe in oblique ways, but.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Neeraj Murani.
I'm sorry, what is it again?
My name is Neeraj Murani. And
Nice.
I found your pieces really interesting and thought-provoking.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask the question that when you are selecting a work, what is the first thing that comes to your mind by whatever means whether you're observing or interacting with it, that gives you the kick to go for the project?
So I missed the last part of you. So what was your last sentence? Sorry.
I was saying that when you're starting a project, what gives you the motivation, or what is the particular thing you're looking that gives the kick to you to initiate that project or work on that project?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Often I start with a curiosity or a kind of nudge or a question that I have about the world, and just doing research and thinking about it leads me into these worlds where we all assume we know so much about the mango, right? Because we eat it every summer, but I didn't know, for instance, that the history of the color Indian yellow, and the reason why I learned all of that was because I was reading about the mango for the project specifically. So the artworks become a way for me to learn about the world. And when I'm first sort of conceiving of the work, I don't know where I'm headed, but somehow there's, the work leads me somewhere at the end, and often it takes 2 years for the projects to be fully realized. And as you saw, I'm often working on similar themes simultaneously. And so that also helps. Does that answer your question?
I would like to add that I guess you're talking about the ambiguity of the situation, that where it leads and as goes the flow. So is it helpful in most cases, or sometimes it gets quite messy or quite in terms of intertwined to reach whatever you're seeking?
Yeah. I think as an artist, I don't know if you're an artist, but we have a toolbox which where we can take, which includes using metaphors and using sort of these poetic strategies, using humor, and we're able to create these pairings or place two things next to each other, which maybe in another context wouldn't make sense, and so I guess what I'd like to say is that I appreciate that process, and I like to take artistic liberties, and place things that wouldn't necessarily go together to see what kind of narrative emerges from that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
So what I see a lot in your work are symbols and metaphors, as you said, a lot that are you're using them. Some of them are obviously a lot of these cultural metaphors, and some of them are revered metaphors, and their association with labor and productivity and profit and consumer capitalism, and that's a very subtle way. I mean, it really is very subtle way of making that, very poetic way of making that connection, and certainly we have seen it, perceptible in our own lives, that how we don't have access to the good mangoes; they're all exported, So that sort of thing, and just appreciating that whole Jahangir's, quest for accumulation, and your, how you've correlated to modern day capitalism, and was that? I'm sure it was a very conscious.
Yeah, I mean, this gesture certainly comes from Jahangir, but there is a play on gender here, right?
Right.
And I think, Jahangir and the Mughal, when we think about femininity and nature, there's an idea of property attached to it, right? And so, I want to put Jahangir's gesture into into a critical mode as well. I'm thinking about in thinking about ecofeminism. Are there other ways for us to imagine our relationship to nature and the natural world? Can we think of it as a collaborative mode rather than a mode of extraction and a mode of domination? Can there be can we think from the perspective of other species? So those are some of the things that that I'm interested in thinking through with this project.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
We would also like to thank Asma for, giving us time and coming here and, from a busy schedule and showcasing her work. And we hope to be able to work with her and to channel her work more into our ecosystem, our artistic ecosystem. Yeah. And thank you so much, Asma. Thanks a lot for hearing. Yeah.